Hello, everybody, and welcome to September's edition of Cribs for Kids 25th Anniversary Safe Sleep Champion webinar series. My name is Devon George. I'm the program officer here at Cribs for Kids. My colleagues Kelly James and Andrea Wilson are joining from behind the scenes for today's very special webinar as we welcome members of the AAP to a roundtable discussion about the 2022 recommendations for reducing infant deaths in the sleep environment. As you enter the webinar, you saw your mics are automatically muted, your cameras are off. So relax. In a few minutes, the Q&A feature will open. That's part of why this month's webinar is so special. So what are these webinars? Well, today is the 8th, who's counting? Me, and our year-long, all-year 25th anniversary. Sorry, let me just back up. You can tell they're live, right? So it's the 8th in our year-long series of free monthly webinars marking Cribs for Kids 25th anniversary across 2023. It was a lot of twos in there for me to get in. So all year long, around the 25th of the month, since it's our 25th anniversary, we talk with Safe Sleep Champions about the work they do to prevent infant deaths and injuries from unsafe sleep. They are live, as I just said. You may have heard me coughing during the intro, but they are recorded. And that means you can visit our website to watch earlier webinars, so the 7 that we've already done, that you may have missed, or better still, share them with colleagues and other like-minded folks so that we can spread that safe sleep message. To find our other webinars and to register for the next ones coming up, you'll go to cribsforkids.org, click on the About menu, and there you'll find our 25th anniversary link. It's this page where you find all the webinar info, past sessions, registration for next month, and save the dates for the remainder of the year. And as you scroll through the webinar library, you'll see we have covered lots of grounds talking with experts in infant products, research, community health, education, and support for parents. So that's cribsforkids.org, About menu, 25th anniversary link. We want to give our experts in the audience here today as much of the hour as possible, so here we go. We started the hour with 2 videos from Cribs for Kids. Each is about the American Academy of Pediatrics' updated 2022 recommendations for reducing infant deaths in the sleep environment that was released last summer. The first video was an overview of the latest recommendations, and the second video, where you heard our lullaby music bed underneath, 12 Steps for 12 Months of Safe Sleep, is how Cribs for Kids followed those AAP guidelines to create updated safe sleep education messaging that focuses on those 12 months and kind of digestible do this information, each with an easily recognizable icon. And that's what we're here to talk about today, are those safe sleep recommendations that are foundation of the mission we all share, safe sleep to prevent infant deaths and injuries. And it's the who that makes today particularly exciting. The AAP recommendations are written by the Task Force on Sudden Infant Death Syndrome and the Committee on Fetus and the Newborn. Today, we are lucky enough to have 4 task members joining us live to answer your questions. I'll briefly introduce each one of these very accomplished doctors. You can read more about them when you visit our 25th anniversary page for their in-depth bios. So first, we once again welcome Dr. Mike Goodstein. In addition to being one of our experts, Dr. Goodstein is also the moderator of today's Safe Sleep Expert Roundtable. He's been an attending neonatologist for 30 years at York Hospital in the Wellspan Medical Group. He's the director of newborn services and a clinical professor of pediatrics at the College of Medicine of the Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Goodstein has been a member of the AAP's Task Force on SIDS since 2010 and is currently the medical director for the National Collaborative for Infant Safe Sleep. The other authors of the 22 recommendations, who you can see here and you'll see here soon on your screen, are here today are Doctors Rebecca Carlin, Jeffrey Colvin, and Susan Hwang. Dr. Carlin is an assistant professor of pediatrics and attending pediatric hospitalist at Columbia University's Medical Center and New York Presbyterian's Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital. Her research focuses on decreasing disparities in sleep-related deaths by educating families and caregivers about safe sleep and breastfeeding, with particular interest in how social networks and norms drive infant care practice. Dr. Carlin joined the AAP Task Force on SIDS in 2020. Also joining is Dr. Jeffrey Colvin. He's the Director of Research for General Academic Pediatrics at Children's Mercy Kansas City. Dr. Colvin's also an attorney and co-founded Children's Mercy's Center for Family and Community Connections and the KLS Legal Services Clinic at Children's Mercy. A member of the task force, his research focuses on the intersection of the social determinants of health, especially children, and interventions addressing unmet social needs in the healthcare setting. And finally, we welcome Dr. Susan Hwang. She's a neonatologist, health services researcher, and perinatal quality improvement expert at Children's Hospital Colorado and University of Colorado School of Medicine. She leads her state's substance abuse exposed newborn quality improvement collaborative and the data-driven engagement of families to improve the NICU experience. Her research is focused on the transition of high-risk infants from hospital to home with a focus on safe sleep to reduce SUID. So each of these accomplished and dedicated docs are here to answer your questions about infant safe sleep. And with a giant thank you, it is an honor for me to turn this webinar over to Dr. Goodstein and the guests. I'm going to mute. I'll leave my camera on. I'll pop back in, and Dr. Goodstein will tell you a little bit how it's going to work.
Great. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Devon. Appreciate that. Always a pleasure to be here with you and the Cribs team. And a big thank you to my partners on the task force for taking time out of their busy schedules to help promote some education here today so you all can take these answers to your questions and go back to your teams and your communities and promote safe sleep. So we've already received a ton of questions ahead of time. So we have a list to work off of, but we're also going to work in some questions that you can pop up today in the Q&A. So I know people are focused on the chat, and you can make your hellos there, but for questions for us, put that into the Q&A, which we'll be able to see them there. So we'll work in as many as we can. Don't worry if your question doesn't get answered. We will make a point of getting an answer back to you. It might take a couple of weeks to sort through all of them, but we will make sure that you get an answer to your questions. We'll make those available for everybody. So let's dive in, because we don't have a ton of time and there's a lot of questions, and hopefully we're going to have some robust conversation today. I know we will. So let's kick it off with a hospital-based question here about education. And actually this person they squeezed in 4 questions into one. Oh, it's like maybe it's a Passover thing. Anyway, here's the first one we'll throw out there. How should we educate all parents on safe sleep? What safe sleep videos should we be showing to every parent in the hospital setting? How can hospitals reach out to OB and pediatric partners for them to include safe sleep conversations with their parents? So there's a mouthful. And let's see. Rebecca, you want to give some thoughts here on that?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is to have a standardized approach so that make sure that you're addressing every single parent. While we know that some parents and families are higher risk, the real key to safe sleep education is that it's universal. So having a protocol in your nursery and NICU for educating parents, I think is really important. There's a variety of videos out there. I can't really speak to the specifics of which one I would personally recommend. I think that different hospitals make their own as well. And then the last thing is, I would say, as a hospitalist who doesn't spend much time in the nursery, that really educating families when they come back to the hospital with their kids and making sure that the nurses on the units are well educated is also really important. We have a lot of unsafe sleep practices in our hospital on the wards, even though we don't have it in the nursery. And so I like to highlight that point.
Great. Thank you. That's a great answer. And just to kind of play off of that, yeah, there are a ton of videos. I think every state has their own video. There's lots of private ones out there. The NICHD made one that's very nice, but it's 20 minutes long. So you have to balance like people's attention spans against what information you need to get out there. Personally, although I'm in Pennsylvania, we use the one that comes out of our neighbor state down in Maryland, in Baltimore, the Be More for Healthy Babies video. It's 6 minutes long. It integrates 3 families' losses and how they wanted to promote safe sleep so that it wouldn't happen to you, with interspersed with the actual messages from healthcare professionals. It's very, very impactful, and it doesn't take very long. And it's just a brutally honest but real approach to what needs to happen to make sure your baby has safe, your family's promoting safe sleep, and what the risk is to not do the real outcomes to not doing that. Susan, what are your thoughts here with education in the hospital and partnering with our OB and pediatric colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, Michael, that question has a lot in there to comment on. I think what's really important is consistency across the perinatal spectrum. There's got to be consistent messages and consistent engagement with families from the prenatal period to birth hospitalization, and then in that, up to 1 year of age, with the outpatient providers as well on the infant care side. I think, but a critical piece is convincing all of those providers that parent education and engagement around safe sleep is a priority. And I think that's where we're still not entirely there. I think we in pediatrics and infant care certainly recognize the importance. I think it may be more difficult, for instance, our prenatal providers that have a very full day to yet add another topic that needs to be discussed. I think it's really important to actually educate our providers and our peers and colleagues about why this is so important so that we can then have consistent messaging across the perinatal spectrum. I will comment on the newborn piece. I'm a neonatologist, and I think what's really important is, again, consistency in practice. In the well baby nursery, we know that all of those babies are eligible for engaging in safe infant sleep, but we know it doesn't happen consistently, even in the newborn nursery, and certainly not in the NICU, and hence we're working on that. So I would say even during birth hospitalization, there's still a lot that we need to do to engage both our providers and our parents about consistency in what we say and also what we do.
That's great. And I like both of you mentioned about the consistency. And I think that's really one of the keys, that we need to model safe sleep, and it can't be a one and done, because parents are taking information wherever they see it, whether it's the photographs that you have up in your hallway, in your hospital, anything that shows an unsafe sleep environment kind of undermines our messaging. So we do need to be consistent. And I think that continuum, to me, it's a lifelong continuum. So we need to be teaching babysitters in their babysitting classes so that they do safely. If we catch kids, there was a Girl Scout program which I thought was fantastic. There's nothing like a Girl Scout with an issue, and their passion is unbelievable. So I think if you teach kids, you don't have the right thing. You don't have to unteach them later on when they're ready to be parents. And then it goes to the other end of the spectrum, right? You can do everything right, but if the grandparent decides they're going to put the baby face down, then that it could be potentially one of the most dangerous things, because if you're used to back sleeping and then somebody puts you prone, that's up to a 20-fold increased risk of death from that unaccustomed prone sleeping. So we need to get everybody on the same page. And I do think it's challenging with our obstetrical colleagues. They do have so much that they're doing, and kind of their focus is on the mom. But if we can get more engagement, and I think that's one of the studies that Dr. Moon and Dr. Hwang and others are doing now. I think it's SMART Study 2, because I'm on the Data Safety Review Board, where they're pushing out multimedia messaging videos to families to reinforce the messages after they go home. Well, on this updated version of the trial, they're also including some messaging prenatally, what I think is great, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a delivery, and I bet Susan or Rebecca, you probably have had the same experiences, probably Jeffrey too, going to talk to a family after they've given birth, or when they're in labor, and it's like, just simple things like, are you planning on breastfeeding? I haven't decided. Who's your pediatrician going to be? I haven't decided. So you've had all this time to work on this stuff, but a lot of times your first messaging is at birth or after the baby is born, and you just can't do it all in one shot. People are exhausted. It's it's grueling having a baby, and there's so much information being thrown at you. So that's why it's so important that there's repetition. I think on average it takes about 8 exposures to a concept before it really kind of sinks in, and then you have to be thinking about how do you achieve actual behavior change if they're not on board with what the recommendations are. So we've got a lot of challenges here. Let me bring.
And Dr. Goodstein,
yeah, please, Jeffrey, add in.
Yeah, and in terms of behavioral change, the science says that the number of sectors, so to speak, that an individual hears that message from, as those sectors increase, they're more likely to change their behavior. And I know this question was specifically about healthcare, but the more we can start thinking about those sectors outside of healthcare, because healthcare is just a little blip on the screen for these families. So the more that we can get involved with WIC, and there's been some good research from Rachel Moon about that, WIC and where people buy their diapers, daycare centers, not only enforcing safe sleep, but also ensuring that their families do that at home. Like you said, grandparents, and where do grandparents get their information from? How can we partner with those? So the more sectors that are supporting that message, the better.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, the social norms are so critical, and a lot of it's outside of medicine because parents are reaching out to the people that are important to them. And Rachel, Dr. Moon has done some really interesting research, and Rebecca also has been working in that realm because we know that people are seeing stuff on the internet, and so much of that information is incorrect. And just the images. And that was a study that Dr. Moon and I did where we looked at just images from photo companies, and like 99% of them were wrong. There's another study that just came out. I think it looked at Instagram messaging.
I was
And
just going to say, we did one looking at Instagram,
Yeah.
and over 98% had at least one unsafe thing in it. For when we picked the hashtags that would talk about nurseries, that people would search for, like nursery ideas and other things. And for the most part, while parents may not think about their pediatrician and whether they're going to breastfeed before they have their child, they usually have their nursery set up. So, once it's set up in an unsafe way, it's harder to change it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's another follow-up study that just came out from the Dutch researchers that saw exactly what you saw. The vast majority of the posts and images had incorrect information and bad imaging. So it's a lot of work to do. And I think it's not one of the questions, but well, it is like, how can we do a better job with our education? And I think prenatally, if we could, and there's community efforts out there already having community baby showers. And there's been data showing that is helpful. So we can get people the right stuff, or even if the obstetricians just give a list. And this was from a project that the AAP supported, creating a list of safe things for your baby shower. If we could promote that and get that out to people before they make their purchase, it's a lot easier to get them to make the right purchases and then ask them to return things that are not going to be safe. And unfortunately, there are tons and tons of products out there that are unsafe. So actually, maybe we can talk about that a little bit. I was going to get to this later, but let me see. Here's a question. And Jeffrey, I'm going to put this out to you. A couple of questions here. Keeping up with product recalls is a challenge. How can we have a more widespread message to the public about these? And then why are unsafe products like the Docatot still available when it can lead to suffocation deaths?
Okay, so for the first one, how can we get the message about recalls out on a widespread basis? Yeah, right now it seems like we have this antiquated system where we rely on the consumer to send back a postcard in the mail. And honestly, I don't know how many times I did that as a parent, but probably my wife did it because she's a better parent than me, but I'm not sure how many times I did it. And it seems like right now there's a lot of reliance on social media to get the message out, which I think is good. But I don't know how to make that message, how to amplify that message. Now, are there connections we can make with other organizations that reach the populations who might be most at risk? So what social media platforms do higher risk families tune into, and how can we connect to them rather than the selection bias, let's say, that I might have of being connected to Safe Kids Kansas, right? That's such a selection bias if I'm listening to them. So how can we kind of amplify that message? And then, how can providers maybe get this message better to their families in real time rather than waiting for a well child check? Can we leverage patient portals to push out messages? And how can we maybe somehow even just inform families about periodically checking with the CPSC website? Can that be done through WIC offices or home visitation or parents as teachers? Is that information that all families should get when they're in the newborn nursery or for their first well child check? So again, I don't know. And it is a problem, but there's a lot of creative people out there, and we need to start working on it.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're absolutely right. We have a very antiquated system, and even just for products that get out there. So just to mention a product like the Docatot, that really should be coming off the market because thank goodness I believe it was the Safe Cribs Act that was put forth and went into law through CPSC. I believe it was in 21, went into effect in 22, or I might be off by a year. But basically we have a very challenging system in that anybody can put product out there, and they're mostly just have voluntary recommendations for what how those products are made to perform and how they're actually constructed. And so there's a lack of oversight. And this is something that I really do a lot of lecturing on now, that most of the standards are voluntary. And then if you have a new product that doesn't fall into a category, then there's no standards for it. And it's very different. So the FDA, if you have a new drug, you are mandated by law to test that and test that and test that through different levels of testing until you prove that it's safe and effective to use. And then you have to have all kinds of post-production follow-up to make sure that after it goes out, there aren't things that you missed in the studies you've done. It is the complete opposite when it comes to product. You can put out whatever you want unless there's a mandatory product standard for it. So there's a mandatory product standard for cribs and bassinets. But the disaster of the Rock and Play came about because it was considered a new product, and so it didn't have a standard. Then there are companies like ASTM who make a voluntary standard, and there's a lot of hinky stuff that goes on with this, to be quite honest, because there are people who vote on what the standard should be, and it's dominated by manufacturers. So in the case of the Rock and Play, it was a very small committee, and the committee was headed by the engineer of the Rock and Play. So guess what happened? That product got out on the market, even though in other countries they restricted its use. It was not allowed to be a sleeper in Australia or England or Canada. It was only allowed to be a soother or rocker, and it wasn't allowed for sleep use. So and then there's flaws in the Consumer Product Safety Commission, Consumer Product Safety Act, the Danny Kasar law, which I believe it's 6B is the sub segment. Jeffrey, was that it? Is it 6B? So 6B basically says if there's a problem with a product, CPSC just can't go out there and give a warning. It's got to talk to the company and get whatever comes out has to be approved of by the company that there's a problem with the product. So with the Rock and Play, for example, they didn't say there was a problem with the Rock and Play and there were suffocations. All that came out is it said, if you have an inclined sleeper, that you should make sure you're strapping the babies in. And they didn't mention, oh, by the way, 20 or more kids died in this because they were flipping around and got face down in them, and it was specifically the Rock and Play. So there's a lot that needs to happen to improve product safety, but any product that doesn't meet the mandatory standard for a sleep space for a baby that's going to be used for under 5 months of age needs to come off the market, and that's the law right now. So,
Michael, like in addition to that, I think for most families and even for providers, we're not going to be able to keep up with the numerous products that are introduced every month. And so I think just sticking with the core principles put forth by the AAP guidelines and using those as the guiding light for parents to decide if something is safe or not. So if we think about all of these sleeping positioners and devices, the question that families need to ask is, will the infant lay flat? Is there any soft bedding that lines, the inside of that? And is it an entirely separate sleep space outside of the bed? And so if we apply those principles, then we can clearly say that the DockATot is not safe, the Rock and Play is not safe, a wedge in the crib is not safe. And so that's what we talk about a lot in the NICU, because there are so many products. And even if our, legislative folks and our regulatory folks get their act together, I don't think they're still going to be able to keep up with, our capitalist, economic system that's going to put forth whatever products families are looking for to get some more sleep.
Yeah, no, great. That's excellent. Rebecca, anything you want to add on that one?
I was just going to say that I think that part of the problem, and the law tries to address this, but it's sort of impossible, as Susan said, to really fully address this, is that a lot of these products are actually like legally not for sleep. So Like the DockATot has a big warning, it's not for sleep on it, but yet everybody puts their baby to sleep on it. And so part of the law said that advertising, that you can no longer advertise it, including showing pictures of a sleeping baby in it, or it's going to be considered a sleep surface and it's going to have a standard. So I think some of this is really also educating families around the fact that they may have these products for other purposes, but like really, like Susan said, that they can't be for sleep. When I did a lot of outpatient primary care pediatrics, I also would sometimes ask new parents to show me their nursery. People are like always really excited to show me. And I found like boppy pillows in cribs after I was told that there was nothing in the crib, because they were like, oh, but that's what they sleep on. Like, I think that parents don't always realize exactly what they're doing. And so sometimes I think a picture is really worth 1,000 words.
That is brilliant. Yeah, I was just going to mention about boppies and about products being used off label. So, the DockATot originally was marketed as a sleeper. And then when all this came up, their marketing people were so smart. They said, oh, no, this is just a lounger. And they put a big warning, not for sleep. But what do you think people are doing with it? Right. So they're pretty sneaky about things. So we have to stay one step ahead of them and warn our parents. Also be like a kidney, filter out all the stuff, filter everything out and only keep the right stuff, because there's just way too many bad products out there. So, so thank you for that. And yeah, to be aware, those boppy pillows, yeah, they're great for breastfeeding, but you can't use them for developmental care and put your kid on there to let them lift their head, because if you go make dinner and you've put them there for their quote unquote tummy time and it's unobserved and they face plant, over 120 kids have died in their boppies. So this is a big problem, and why CPSC is making new recommendations now to change the design, which unfortunately Boppy is actually fighting, which is just really mind-boggling to me. So here's another question to talk about how to respond to parents sleeping with their babies in the hospital and refusing to follow safe sleep on the unit. So I'll open that up for all of you, since you all have kind of mentioned experience with this. Susan, you want to go first?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I work in the NICU, and so I would say it's less an issue of, co-sleeping in that adult bed. And it's really around what the sleep area of the hospitalized infant looks like. I think for many families, there's good intention there in the sense that they have a lot of sentimental items that are in the crib that they put in, since they cannot be with their infant 24/7. There are blankets and hats and stuffies and all sorts of things in the crib. In addition, we know that preterm infants have a lot of reflux. They also may be more irritable than healthy full-term infants. And so the families have an emotional response to that. And so they want to do whatever is possible to make their infant more comfortable. And so there has to be a very culturally sensitive and engaging conversation with families about the why in the sleep practice that they're picking for their infant. And for some families, they may say, well, that's what my primary nurse always does. And so again, there's got to be a lot of conversations with the staff as well as with the families. So for me, what I recommend is really digging a little deeper and not drawing a line in the sand saying this is our rule and this is what we need to do, but really going a little deeper and asking the families why do you think that practice or position is best for your infant, and have a conversation, a dialogue, and then bring in some of that education around what the AAP recommends. I think in some ways the NICU, because it's a prolonged hospitalization, affords a longer length of engagement opportunities to have conversations with families that continue. And for us, we actually celebrate it as a milestone when we say your baby is now medically eligible, is stable enough for safe infant sleep, very much like taking the first bottle or tolerating other things that when a baby is critically ill, they cannot. And so if we really celebrate it as a milestone, as a developmental milestone, I think we get a lot more buy-in from parents. I think for infants that have gone home and are hospitalized, oftentimes due to a respiratory, issue, I think a talking point that may be helpful is that we know that infants, even if they're healthy at baseline, if they've had a recent cold or bronchiolitis, that becomes a risk factor for sleep-associated infant death. So there's got to be even additional caution. And so it's a great place in the hospital to do what we recommend while you've got a lot of support staff there to help that transition back home after that brief hospitalization.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I think we have an advantage in the NICU that we develop these really kind of intense therapeutic relationships, and we develop trust, and then we can have those open and honest conversations. Because if we just are throwing education at people without understanding where they're at and what might be their cultural norm, then it's going to be in one ear and out the other. Now, Susan's done a lot of work and kind of shared a bit with positioning babies in the NICU and the things we do. There are a lot of things that because of medical issues, we do that you would never do at home, whether it's positioning of the head because of head shape issues or respiratory distress issues and prone positioning. So we talk about therapeutic positioning when the babies are sick, and then that transition to the home sleep environment. And so for people who have questions about that transition and how to do that, we actually do have a clinical report that was like from 2017 or 18. Can't believe it's that long already. In addition to a technical report that goes through all the issues of premature babies, from whether it's reflux to respiratory distress as something that's a medically complex child, and how to transition them, and just some guidelines for doing that. Jeffrey, you want to add anything from your experience in the hospital setting?
It's been a long time since I was in the hospital setting. Well, maybe not that long, about 7 years. But one of the things that we do in the hospital setting is infants were all given a sleep sack on admission. And so that was our way of kind of demonstrating that. And then they could take it home with them. And the nurses were very vigilant about safe sleep. And sometimes you would see, this is not the newborn nursery, this is actually up on the wards. You would see families on the parent sofa couch sleeping with their infant. And the nurses were very vigilant about that. And usually it didn't result in any kind of confrontation, but occasionally there was. And the family would have to sign a waiver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what we would do in our hospital. Rebecca, well, you have parents that insist on co-sleeping, on the floor, and they have a sick child with bronchiolitis. And I've actually seen parents try to climb into the crib with their kid.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think that I think that we need to come at this a little bit, and this comes with sort of all of safe sleep education, at coming at understanding that these parents whose kids are in the hospital are stressed, their kids haven't slept for a long time, they're in a different environment. That crib is probably a lot bigger than the crib that the bassinet they're usually in, and really trying to work with the family, as Susan said, in terms of like coming to a way that we can do this safely. I think using it as an education piece when you walk in and see them co-sleeping, not just on the bed, but right, it's like a pull-out couch. They can get, it's like the least safe environment you could ever have. And I really try to use it as an education time for both the nurses when they're also rounding with us, and then the trainees. But I have to say that the norms, at least at my hospital, around safe sleep on the wards for nursing and other staff are really not good. And a lot of it comes from the PICU. They're often like on an incline in the PICU, and there's often positioners in there, and there's not a lot of storage space, and so the diapers and the all the stuff is in the crib. It's not necessarily that they're prone, they're on their back, but there's often a lot of other factors. And so I think really just trying to keep slowly pounding. And I do try to go back to the families, talk to the families at that moment, and then go back with some education, because I think that the hospitalization is really overwhelming, and giving them the NICHD pamphlet or some other education that they can sort of hold on to and think about is often helpful.
Yeah. I mean, we use a waiver too, and the waiver is very blunt. That says, by not following our recommendations, you risk having your child die in the hospital, and that you're not holding us responsible. I mean, we don't want that to happen, but really don't want them sleeping on a pull-out couch together. That's just, It's up to a 70-fold increased risk of dying that way. And you're in the hospital for a reason. The last thing you want to have happen is an unnecessary death in the hospital. So but I think, hopefully you can get parents to understand that what you want to do at home, we still want to try and change your thinking on that, but at least in the hospital, when your kids at the most vulnerable, that this is a super dangerous thing that you're doing, and we don't want anything bad to happen to your child. All right, let me get to another question here. Kind of an offshoot of what we're talking about. So this is a kind of a combination, a couple of things here. What tangible tips do you have when there's a major pushback on safe sleep practices from clients and patients? Many are pushing for a harm reduction approach for infant safe sleep. What are your thoughts on that? Pros and cons. So, Rebecca, we'll start with you.
So I think this is an issue that comes up a lot, and I think it has its own sort of social and reality based portion of it, and then it has its own like legal portion. So we know that all of that co-sleeping, and I mean that's the most common thing that people are fighting us about in general in the office, has risks regardless of how it's done. And so as the AAP, like we're not going to recommend it. And I don't think that as pediatricians, we should be recommending anything other than really safe sleep practices. But I also do think that really partnering with families and making sure that we're not going to go into their homes and we're not going to stop them from sleeping in the bed. And so if they're going to do that, we should make it as safe as possible. And so I really do try to talk to the families and be clear that this is not my recommendation, but also that if you're going to be in the bed, please make sure that there's no soft bedding around, that nobody's intoxicated, that nobody's using sleeping pills. There's like a lot of, that we don't have any tobacco users, I think, and trying to sort of understand the motivations for doing that so that we can talk about some risk reduction is really important. I also think that people fall asleep feeding their children, and that is a reality. That new parents are exhausted. I fell asleep breastfeeding my child. Like it happens, right? And so we talk about intentions. Like I knew that as soon as I woke up, I put my daughter back in the bassinet that was right next to me because I had no intention of co-sleeping, right? But you have to have that intention made. And I think trying to be understanding about some of these realities is really important. I think when we try to have these really firm, hard rules, like it doesn't go that well. It's exhausting being a new parent. And I think the desperation that parents have is really why they buy all these products. And so sort of trying to be a partner as opposed to like a disciplinarian tends to be more effective.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And that was one thing that the task force really focused on. I think we did a really good job in terms of we need to prepare parents for reality, right? I mean, everybody wants to do things perfect, but we don't live in a perfect world. And some people are going back to work like 1 week or 2 weeks after they have their baby. I mean, it's just an impossibility to be able to do everything perfectly. I mean, people just get exhausted. And I think that's the difference. And we were talking about this before we had everybody come on, the difference between how things go in the US and all the European countries and other first world nations. They give parents paid time off. And maybe that's one of the things that needs to come out of a meeting like this. And as we're kind of moving forward, like what can we do? Maybe we need to become more vocal advocates in the legislative arena to try to promote either state or national initiatives to get paid leave for parents so that they are not so exhausted they fall asleep and roll over their child in bed when their intention was never to even sleep with their baby. So I think one thing that I like to do is I tell parents in the NICU, I said, look, you're going to be tired and you may very well fall asleep while you're breastfeeding your baby or providing cares. So make sure let's say, what are you going to do to be prepared for that? Ask them, how are you going to prepare things? Because you know the adult bed has all kinds of unsafe things that you would never put in your crib, the pillows and the soft bedding and the loose blankets and all the comforts and the covers that we like to snuggle up in that you would never use for your baby. So I think getting them to think ahead before it happens is really a very, very important tool that we can use to make things safer for this inevitability. Susan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the question is, what are you going to do if you fall asleep? No, when you fall asleep with your baby, what is your plan? Right? To have a very explicit conversation with families that they have a plan for what that process is going to look like. I think the other thing about the AAP guidelines that are really helpful in this most recent iteration, I think gets at exactly that. While pediatricians are not explicitly going to take a harm reduction approach, like, we know you're going to co-sleep, so this is how you can do it safely, or we're not going to use that language, but what the guidelines do say is, here's the added risk. If you're going to co-sleep, here's the baseline risk of co-sleeping. And then here's even additional risk with additional risk factors. So if you're a preterm infant, additional risk. If there's a smoker, here's the risk. If there's soft, so I think that provides a really helpful tool to have conversations with families, even though explicitly we're not going to say, we're going to help you make co-sleeping safer. No, we're going to say, here's the risk and here's additional risk above and beyond established just by co-sleeping.
Right. That what a great way to put that. Yeah, so I think there are two ways. I think there are two camps in terms of how we approach education, and I think there are different tools for different purposes. So when it comes to policy, policy has to be like the red rules, right? It's like you always make sure you're operating on the right side. You never go into a patient room without washing your hands. You never get in your car without putting your kid in their car seat, right? Those are just, you don't deviate from that. And so there's a camp of people who feel that, when it comes to safe sleep, you must do everything right, because anything you don't do right is putting your baby at risk. And I understand that thinking. I think for policy, you have to be that way, because if you make the policy, well, sometimes, then you don't have a strong policy and people can do whatever they want. But when the rubber hits the road, when you're having that one-on-one with the family, you can't just talk at them and tell them what to do. They're just going to tell you, yeah, I'm doing that. They're going to lie to you, right? I'm sure you've had that. We've all probably had that sort of people. Yeah, I'm doing everything. You have to have more of an approach with open-ended questions to see what they're doing. And then you can have that back and forth conversation. Like, look, this is what's recommended. I understand what you're doing and why. Let's talk about how we can make things a little safer for your baby. What can we talk about that we can help you to understand why this is dangerous and what you can do to make it a little safer. So I think, in the one-to-one, that a little bit more of that risk reduction. And I think, really what we recommend in terms of that added risk is kind of risk reduction on its side, maybe you could say. So we sneak it in there, but as a policy, you've just got to have hard and set rules. But when you're dealing with families, you have to have conversations. Okay. Jeffrey, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times parents who might be opposed to what you're recommending can really become your allies if they understand the reasoning behind the recommendations. And honestly, even though medically, scientifically, it's not completely accurate, but I tend to kind of couch everything in terms of suffocation. Mm-hmm. And if families can kind of envision why this recommendation is being offered in terms of suffocation, then you can kind of see the light bulb come on, and then they become your ally. But yeah, just collaborate with your families and understand the difficult position they're in as new parents.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I do the exact same thing, because for some people, because SIDS is hard to explain, right? There are all these rules for what defines it as SIDS. At the end of the day, we say, well, we know you can get into some medical stuff about, arousal issues and brain stem abnormalities and serotonin, and that's going to glaze people over, right? They're just not going to get the SIDS is God's will, is what a lot of people think. So it doesn't matter what I do or I don't do. So if you couch it in something that they can really understand, like a pillow on your face so you can't breathe will suffocate your baby and your baby will die. maybe not that blunt, but there's a picture that you can get in your mind that explains like, wow, yeah, that's a dangerous thing. I don't want my baby face down and face planting. I don't want that pillow. I don't want that sheet wrapping around their face. So that's really a brilliant point. I have another question for you, Jeffrey. I'm going to switch, actually kind of extend from where we're talking about. Are bedside sleepers safe to use? Why or why not? Is there a way to choose the safest one?
I'm going to let Dr. Carlin, I can tell she wanted to say something.
Okay.
Dr.
Oh,
Carlin, did you
no,
want to
that's okay.
respond first before we go to bedside
Yeah,
sleeper?
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think in this conversation about sort of risk reduction, I think when we talk to families, we need to realize that they only want what's safest for their kids.
Mhm.
Like, they're not in this to defy us and to do things that are unsafe. And I think that sometimes we get into this thing where we really are very judgmental and think like that they are. And so I think that part of this risk reduction is trying to understand what they think is safer about whatever they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
because that can really help address some of these issues and help. I agree. I think suffocation tends to be like the most concrete image that people can have. But if you don't understand why they're doing it in the first place, it's really hard to plant an image. And if they think that there's something else that's going to go wrong, and then you plant the image of suffocation on top of whatever else they think is going to go wrong, you've now just alienated them as a family. So I do really think that trying to ask open-ended questions about what they're concerned about and why they're doing it is really helpful.
Yeah, point.
Great. Thank you for adding that in. Very important. So Jeffrey, I'll get back to you now about the bedside sleepers.
So there are CPS standards for bedside sleepers, unlike in-bed sleepers, for which there are no CPS standards. And so I think when you're picking a bedside sleeper, look for the CPS label on it to ensure that that product is following that. But I also agree with Susan about any product you pick out and going back to the basics of, is there soft padding in this? Is the surface they're actually sleeping on, is that firm, meaning hard essentially? Is there any kind of incline above 10%? If any of those are true, don't buy it, don't get it. And I think also how that bedside sleeper is being put into place in reality. So is it anchored correctly and firmly? They still give me a little bit of, anxiety. I worry about things coming off the bed into them. Honestly, I would much prefer a crib that's a little bit farther away, or a bassinet that's a little bit farther away. But they are now being regulated by CPSC. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did open the door just a little bit for that in the recommendations in the technical report. So it's not in the policy statement, it just says crib, bassinet, play yard. But in the technical report, I think because there are standards now, we did open that up a little bit. But I steer parents away from it. So for what it costs, and for a little bit more safety, because can the baby roll out? Can something be put in to create that barrier? It's like, if you're going to do that, and also when you wake up in the middle of the night because you have to pee, right? How are you going to get out of the bed with that big thing? You got to go climb down to the foot of the bed to get around where your baby's at, right? So there's some technical issues in terms of how functional they are. And I say, you know what, for what it's worth, get yourself a pack and play, put it right next to your bed, or put something right next to the bed and keep yourself separate. But the baby will be at a level even with you, so you can just slide. So if you're a fresh C-section, you want to be reaching down to the bottom of a pack and play. That's going to hurt a lot, and it's going to be a barrier from its use. Thoughts on that, Susan?
Absolutely. Again, it's understanding why the family thinks that bedside crib, or that attachment is better than a pack and play. Is it cheaper? Do they think that it's somehow easier to just kind of roll over and get the bait, So again, it's understanding the why, and then kind of talking to them about how we could get a better product, a safer product, achieve some of the things that the family's trying to achieve with this less safe product. Right. So there is this sort of bilateral back and forth that has to happen to get to a place where there's trust, where they believe what you're telling them, and that you really feel like you've engaged them effectively. You know, it's not being so dictatorial about these guidelines. And Mike, I love the point that you made about policy having to be black and white, lines that need to be drawn, but the conversations that we have are never that clear cut, and being flexible in situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Devon, I know we're getting close to time and you need to wrap things up. Do we have time for squeezing in one more question, do you think?
You do whatever you want to do. We're so happy you're here.
Boy, I wish I could have my wife say that, like when I have conversations with her. Man, that'd be great. All right, I'm gonna squeeze one more in. We often speak with families that don't have room for a pack and play or crib. What can we tell them? I'm just gonna open that up to everybody because that's a tough one. Rebecca, you want to go first?
Sure. I think I try to talk about what space there is. So a crib can go in a closet. Like it doesn't have to be in any specific place. You don't need a nursery. You don't need any specific place. I also think pack and play, while often the cheapest option, is not always the smallest option, especially for a new baby. And so trying to look at some bassinets, which are often smaller, or sometimes even travel cribs are smaller. And then talking about folding it up, like it doesn't have to be out all the time. It can go in the living room. Like babies don't care. They don't have opinions. Rachel Moon used to joke that she put her child in a drawer. And that it was only when her babysitter was like, you can't do this anymore, that she like got a crib, or the babysitter got the crib. I forget. But the point is that there really aren't, the only rule is that it has to be a separate space and it has to be safe, and don't close the drawer. But I just try to work with them. I live in New York City. I live in a small apartment. Lots of people live in small apartments. I have seen cribs in very small places. I have put cribs in very small places. I think sympathizing sometimes helps with families. Like I talk about how I smushed it in and I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard. But I think that trying to give variability, like variable options, and sort of saying doesn't have to be in the specifically right place, is usually the most helpful thing.
Great answer. And just funny aside, when we would go on vacation, when my son was an infant 20 plus years ago, he slept in his pack and play for 3 years in this one place in a little walk-in closet. That was his space. So we could be in the room, we could have the light on, and we could have him, and it just worked, we created a small space for him and it was perfect. So I have 12:57 on my clock. So I'm going to stop here and turn it back over to Devon. And again, I want to thank Susan and Rebecca and Jeffrey so much for your insightful comments, and again, taking time out of your schedule to share your expertise with everybody. This has really been super awesome, and it's great to get to see you guys. It's been a while. Hope to see y'all in Italy soon. Devon?
Yeah, this has been great. A giant thank you. I don't know, it's a good thing my camera was off because I was kind of feverishly taking notes. And my favorite thing, I think, was what Dr. Carlin said about the intention. Talk to their families about the intention, and that's just such a powerful word, I think, for this. So thank you so much for joining us. I think this would probably go on for another hour and a half. We have so many questions that came in advance, and that we had 6 or so come through as well during this. So I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and your knowledge today. This was a great way to wrap up Baby Safety Month and look towards October SIDS and Safe Sleep Awareness Month. So thanks to Mike, Drs. Carlin, Colvin, Hwang. If we didn't get to your question, give us a week, maybe 10 days, maybe a little bit more, because some of us are traveling for a conference, and we're going to make sure that the experts get the answer and we get it to you. So we appreciate your patience. So now we're going to wrap it up. And if you've joined us before, you may remember we end the webinar with 3 things: a call to action. We open the registration for our next webinar and play our new lullaby, Just Baby a Safe Sleep lullaby. So first, the action item. This is a callback one. Back in March, when we launched our new Safe Sleep Ambassador module, featuring the updates, we asked you to complete the module yourself to become a 2023 Safe Sleep Ambassador. Today, we are asking you to ask someone else, a colleague, a friend, a family member. Did you see my light just went out? To become a Safe Sleep Ambassador as well. Do you have a babysitter? Do you have a teenager in your neighborhood? Is there somebody in line with you, in front of you, at the grocery store who has diapers? You'd be like, hey, don't you want to be a Safe Sleep Ambassador? So the QR code is up there now. Send it to someone who you think will take the 20 minutes or so to learn how to keep babies sleeping safely. Next is our registration for October's webinar, scheduled for Wednesday, October 25th, one of our few that's on the actual 25th of the month. At noon, we're going to discuss infant safe sleep and the important role of first responders. We heard some of the docs today talk about people being in the home, and these are folks that are in the home during sometimes a very critical time. Cribs for Kids has a public safety initiative for our firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and EMTs, coroners, and medical examiners across the country who are committed to infant safe sleep. So to talk about this, next month, we will have participations from this initiative who work in our hometown region of Southwestern PA. Our Chief Operations Officer, Bridget Gossa, will be joined by Tim Leach, the Vice President of the Pittsburgh Firefighters, Local Number 1, Brian Maloney, a Director of Operations for Plum Emergency Medical Services, and by Tim Carson, a County Coroner in our Westmoreland County. They're going to share with us how they work across their communities to support infant safe sleep in the field and beyond. So with just a few of these 25th anniversary webinars left, we hope you're able to join us as we near the end of this year-long series. Again, thank you so much to the doctors today. We love, love, love that you took the time for this. And I bet that so many people on this call feel the same way and would like to carve out more time. Okay, so action item, webinar, thank you. And our lullaby. We close each webinar with Just Baby. Like the Safe Sleep Ambassador in our video library content, it's available online at no cost. The song, the video, the music bed, English and Spanish versions. Again, thank you to our expert guests. And as always, thank you to those joining us live and watching later. The time and commitment you share with us is the only way this works. So you can always reach us, info@cribsforkids.org. Have a great week, everyone.
Bassinet or play our naps, no pillows, blankets. There's no toys, just baby.